The wind in Red Hollow did not blow so much as it scraped. It carried the grit of 3 drought-stricken counties, a fine, choking powder that tasted of iron and dead grass, finding its way through the tightest window seams and into the deepest folds of a woman's clothing. It was late August of 1888, and the heat hung over the territory like a judgment. Clara Hayes sat by the window of her small room above the apothecary, the late afternoon sun turning the dust motes into suspended gold. She held a needle between fingers that were calloused at the tips, but pale and smooth along the knuckles. The dress draped over her lap was ivory silk, a delicate, foolish thing destined for the daughter of the town banker. It was a gown meant for a life Clara had forfeited years ago, a life of parlors and piano lessons and the suffocating safety of a respectable marriage. She bit the thread, the snap sharp in the quiet room. Clara stood up, wincing slightly as the steel stays of her corset dug into her lower ribs. The discomfort was a familiar companion, a physical reminder of the armor she wore against the world. But it was not just whalebone and canvas that pressed against her skin. Tucked into a clever, reinforced pocket sewn into the left side of the bodice, resting just beneath the swell of her breast, was the cold, hard weight of a snub-nosed revolver. It was a small weapon, a .32 caliber pocket pistol with a pearl grip that had lost its luster. It was not a gun for a gunfighter. It was a gun for a woman who had learned that the difference between survival and ruin was often a matter of inches and seconds. She never spoke of it. To the town of Red Hollow, Clara was simply the seamstress who mended their Sunday best by day, and the woman who sang at the Golden Spur Saloon by night. She was useful, and she was fallen. That was the extent of their curiosity. She checked her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her high-collared day dress was modest, gray cotton that swallowed her figure, but her eyes, dark, watchful, and tired, gave her away. She smoothed her hair, pinned back severely, and grabbed her shawl. The sun was dipping toward the jagged horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. It was time to deliver the dress, and then it was time to work. The street below was a wide scar of packed dirt, rutted by wagon wheels and littered with horse manure. Red Hollow was a town built on the promise of cattle and the reality of thirst. The storefronts were weather-beaten wood, their signs faded by the relentless sun. Men loitered on the boardwalks, their faces shadowed under wide brims, watching the world with the idle malice of predators waiting for a limp. Clara walked with her head high, her gaze fixed on the middle distance. She knew better than to make eye contact. As she passed the general store, the bell above the door chimed, and Mrs. Gable stepped out, accompanied by 2 other women from the church auxiliary. They were dressed in stifling black bombazine, their faces pinched with the self-righteousness that flourished in small towns like weeds in a dry creek bed. Clara paused, stepping aside to let them pass on the narrow boardwalk. It was the custom. The clean stepped first, the stained waited. Mrs. Gable stopped, her eyes raking over Clara with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "I hear you are finished with the Miller girl's gown," Mrs. Gable said. Her voice was thin, like dry paper tearing. Clara nodded once. "I'm on my way to deliver it now." "Mrs. Gable, see that you leave it with the housekeeper at the back door," the woman said, sniffing loudly. "We would not want the girl seeing you before her wedding. It might bring bad luck to the union." The other women murmured their agreement, clutching their Bibles like shields. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks, not from shame, but from a cold, simmering anger that she had nursed for 5 years. She tightened her grip on the parcel in her arms. "I will ensure the silk is untouched by my bad fortune," Clara said, her voice steady and low. "The bill is $4. Mrs. Gable scoffed. "You will be paid when Mr. Miller sees fit." They swept past her, leaving a wake of lavender water and judgment. Clara watched them go, her hand drifting unconsciously to her side, pressing against the hidden weight under her corset. It was a reflex, nothing more, a reminder that while they had their Bibles and their husbands, she had 5 rounds of lead and the will to use them. She delivered the dress to the back door as instructed, Taking the coins, the housekeeper thrust at her with a sympathetic grimace, and then turned toward the other side of town, the side where the shadows stretched longer and the laughter was louder and sharper. The Golden Spur Saloon was the heartbeat of Red Hollow's vice, a 2-story structure that smelled of stale beer, sawdust, and unwashed bodies. It was owned, like half the county, by Edgar Vale, though his name was on nothing but the land deeds. Vale was a cattle baron who had built an empire on barbed wire and intimidation. He sat in the high pew on Sundays and counted his illicit earnings on Mondays. Clara entered through the rear alley entrance, a narrow door that led directly to a small dressing room. It was barely a closet, holding a vanity table, a chair, and a rack of gaudy dresses that belonged to the saloon. Not to her. She changed quickly, trading the gray cotton for a dress of crimson velvet. It was cut lower in the chest, though Clara had sewn lace into the neckline to keep some mystery. She tightened the corset strings, feeling the gun settle into its groove. It was heavier now, or perhaps the night just felt heavier. When she stepped out onto the floor, the saloon was already humming. The piano player, a man named Thomas who had lost 3 fingers in the war and played with a frantic, rolling rhythm, nodded to her. "Evening, Miss Clara," Thomas said. "Rough crowd tonight. The boys from the B-Bar C are in." Clara scanned the room. The air was thick with smoke. Cowboys, drifters, and railroad men crowded the bar and the gaming tables. In the back corner, holding court at a round table, sat Sheriff Rusk. Rusk was a slab of a man, his neck thick and red, his uniform straining at the buttons. He was laughing at something a younger deputy said, his hand wrapped around a glass of whiskey. Rusk was Vale's dog, a creature of appetite and brutality who kept the peace by ensuring only the right people were victimized. Clara moved toward the small stage, feeling Rusk's eyes on her. It was a physical sensation, like a greasy thumb pressed against her spine. She ignored him, signaling Thomas to begin. She sang old songs, ballads of lost loves and green valleys that none of these men would ever see again. Her voice was a clear, smoky alto that cut through the noise of the room, silencing the poker games for a few moments. She sang for 2 hours, dodging the groping hands of drunkards as she moved between the tables during breaks, selling watered-down whiskey for 10 cents a glass. It was near midnight when the atmosphere in the room shifted. The swing doors at the front burst open, banging hard against the walls. The noise was like a gunshot, and half the room flinched. Sheriff Rusk stood up slowly, his hand resting on the butt of his heavy Colt revolver. Deputies poured in, men with badges pinned to dusty coats, their faces grim and eager. The music stopped. The silence that fell over the Golden Spur was sudden and absolute. "Nobody moves," Rusk bellowed, his voice booming over the gathered crowd. "We are looking for a man, a thief and a killer. Goes by the name of Jesse Crow." A murmur ran through the room. The name was known. Jesse Crow was a ghost story in the territory, an outlaw who hit banks and payroll wagons with a precision that bordered on military. But the rumors lately said he had turned feral, that his gang had burned a homestead 3 counties over. Clara stood near the bar, clutching a tray of empty glasses. She watched Rusk's eyes dart around the room, hungry for violence. "He was seen riding this way," Rusk continued, walking into the center of the room. "Injured, bleeding. Anyone hiding him gets the rope. Anyone sees him and does not speak up gets the same." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty door. She began to back away slowly, moving toward the hallway that led to the dressing rooms and the back exit. She wanted no part of this. If Rusk was on a hunt, blood would be spilled, and she intended to be nowhere near the spray. She slipped into the hallway, the shadows swallowing her crimson dress. The noise of the search, tables being overturned, men shouting protests, echoed behind her. She reached for the handle of her dressing room door. It was unlatched. Clara froze. She always locked it. Always. She drew a breath, steadying her hands, and pushed the door open. The room was dark, lit only by the sliver of moonlight coming through the high, barred window. At first, she saw nothing. Then, a boot scraped against the floorboards. Clara stepped inside and closed the door behind her, leaning her back against it. Her hand went instantly to her bodice, fingers curling around the pearl grip of the revolver. "Who is there?" she whispered, her voice like cracking ice. A low groan answered her. In the corner, wedged between her vanity and the wall, a shape moved. A man. He was slumped on the floor, one leg stretched out at an awkward angle. He lifted his head. Even in the gloom, she could see the sheen of sweat on his face. He was pale, deathly so, with dark hair plastered to his forehead. He wore a dust-caked duster coat that was stained black on the left shoulder. "Help me!" he rasped. Clara did not move to help. She ripped the gun from her corset, the metal catching the moonlight as she leveled it at him. The hammer clicked back with a sound that seemed deafening in the small space. "You are him," she said. "The Crow." He let out a short, wheezing laugh that turned into a cough. "I have been called worse. Get out," Clara hissed. "Rusk is out there tearing the floorboards up. If he finds you here, he will hang me alongside you just for the sport of it." "I cannot walk," the man said. He tried to shift, and a hiss of pain escaped his teeth. His hand came away from his shoulder slick with blood. "My horse took a stumble. Then the bullet took me." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was a disaster. If she turned him in, Rusk might reward her, or he might accuse her of harboring him to avoid paying the reward. If she let him stay, and they found him. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. "Open up! Check the back rooms!" a deputy shouted. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded Clara's veins. There was no time to think, only to react. "Get in the wardrobe," she ordered. Keeping the gun trained on him, he looked at the narrow wooden cabinet. "It is too small." "Get in or I will shoot you myself and save the sheriff the trouble," she whispered furiously. The man gritted his teeth and dragged himself upright. Stumbling, he was taller than he looked on the floor, lean and dangerous even in his ruin. He practically fell into the wardrobe, collapsing among the spare petticoats and cloaks. Clara slammed the wardrobe doors shut and spun around just as the knob of her room turned. She threw herself into the chair before the vanity, grabbing a powder puff and dabbing it frantically at her cheeks, trying to mask the terror in her eyes. The door flew open. It was Deputy Miller, a young, cruel-faced man who had tried to corner her in the alley 2 weeks prior. He held a lantern in one hand and a gun in the other. "Well now," Miller sneered, lowering the lantern, hiding away. "Clara?" Clara turned slowly, forcing her face into a mask of bored irritation. "I'm changing. Miller, or is it the sheriff's new policy to watch women dress?" Miller stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the corners. He kicked the leg of the cot. "Heard you slipping away. Thought maybe you had company. Only my own exhaustion." Clara said, "Are you quite done?" Miller walked toward the wardrobe. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Her hand drifted toward the table where she had set the gun down, hiding it beneath a silk scarf. Miller reached for the wardrobe handle. "If you open that," Clara said, her voice dropping an octave, flat and hard, "you will see things that your mother would wash your eyes out for seeing. And I will tell the sheriff exactly why you were so eager to rummage through my underthings." Miller paused. He looked at Clara, then at the wardrobe. He knew Rusk's temper. If Rusk thought Miller was distracted by a skirt instead of hunting the outlaw, there would be hell to pay. Miller spat on the floor. "Keep your secrets, whore. But if I find out you lied..." He left the threat hanging and backed out of the room, leaving the door ajar. Clara waited. She counted to 10, then 20. She listened to the boots fading down the hall, back toward the main room. She stood up, her knees trembling violently, and locked the door. She grabbed the gun from under the scarf and moved to the wardrobe. Throwing it open, Jesse Crow tumbled out, half-conscious. He hit the floor with a heavy thud. Clara stood over him, the adrenaline turning her vision sharp and bright. She was furious at him for bringing this danger to her sanctuary, furious at Rusk, furious at the world that constantly demanded she be harder, colder, faster. She kicked his boot. "Wake up," Jesse groaned, his eyes fluttering open. They were gray, like storm clouds, and glazed with fever. You have a terrifying bedside manner, ma'am," he mumbled. Clara did not smile. She knelt, pressing the barrel of the small revolver directly against the center of his chest, right over his heart. The heat of his body radiated through his shirt, contrasting with the cold steel. "Listen to me, outlaw," she said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I do not know you. I do not care about your legend. You are a liability. I should call them back. I should drag you out there and let them have you." Jesse looked down at the gun, then up at her face. He saw the fear beneath the anger. He saw the desperation of a woman who had been cornered one too many times. He didn't flinch. He didn't beg. Instead, the corner of his mouth twitched upward in a tired, dangerous half-smile. He reached up slowly, his hand shaking, and wrapped his fingers gently around the barrel of the gun, not pushing it away, but steadying it against his own chest. "Point it at me if you want my heart," he whispered. "It is the only thing I have left that is worth anything." Clara stared at him. The line was absurd. It was theatrical. It was something a dime novel hero would say, but the look in his eyes, there was no mockery there, just a profound, exhausted honesty. He was offering her his life because he had no strength left to defend it. Her finger wavered on the trigger. "Damn you," she whispered. She pulled the gun back, tucking it into the pocket of her skirt. "If you bleed on my good rug, I will kill you myself tomorrow," she said, standing up. She went to the wash basin and poured water into a bowl. She tore a strip from her petticoat. Good linen, ruined for a thief. When she turned back, he was watching her, his eyes clearing slightly. "Why?" he asked. "Why didn't you let them take me?" Clara dipped the cloth in the water, wringing it out with efficient, brutal twists. "Because Sheriff Rusk is a pig," she said, kneeling beside him again. "And if he wants you dead this badly, then you must have done something to inconvenience him. And that, Mr. Crow, makes you the only interesting thing in this town." She pressed the cold cloth to his shoulder. He hissed, his back arching off the floor. But he didn't cry out. "The bullet is still in there," she said, inspecting the wound. It was a messy entry, high on the shoulder. It missed the lung, but not by much. "I can dig it out," he said through gritted teeth. "Just give me a knife. You will pass out and bleed to death," Clara said. "Lie still." She worked in silence for a time, cleaning the blood away. The sounds of the saloon below had quieted down. The raid was moving out to the streets. The thunder that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke. A low, rolling growl that shook the window pane. Rain began to fall. Heavy, fat drops that turned the dust outside into mud. Clara looked at the man lying on her floor. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30. His face, beneath the grime and the stubble, was handsome in a sharp, hawk-like way, but it was a face marked by the sun and by violence. There were scars on his neck, and his hands were rough, scarred maps of a hard life. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Clara," she said. "Clara," he repeated, testing the weight of it. "You are a brave woman, Clara." "I am a tired woman," she corrected. "And you are heavy. We need to move you to the cot." She helped him stand, his arm draped over her shoulders. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone, and the smell of him, sweat, horsehair, rain, and copper blood, filled her nose. It was a raw, masculine scent that was terrifyingly intimate. She lowered him onto her narrow cot. He sighed, his eyes closing as his head hit the pillow. "Sleep," she said. "If you make a sound, I will smother you with the pillow." "I believe you would," he murmured. Clara blew out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness save for the gray light of the storm outside. She sat in the chair by the window, the gun back in her hand, resting on her lap. She watched the rain streak the glass. Down on the street, she saw the sheriff's men mounting their horses, their slickers shining in the wet. They were riding out, heading south, away from the town. They had missed him. Clara looked back at the cot. Jesse Crow was breathing steadily, a shallow, ragged rhythm. She had crossed a line tonight. By hiding him, she had made herself an enemy of the law, such as it was in Red Hollow. She had tied her fate, however briefly, to a man with a price on his head. It was madness. It was suicide. But as the thunder cracked again, lighting up the room in a flash of white, Clara realized something else. For the first time in years, she did not feel entirely alone. She was terrified. Yes, but she was also awake. The numbness that she wore like her gray dress had cracked. She fingered the pearl grip of the revolver. "Point it at me if you want my heart." She shook her head in the dark. "Keep your heart, Outlaw," she thought. "Just keep your word." The rain hammered against the roof, washing the dust from the world. But inside the small room above the apothecary, the air was thick with the scent of blood and the electric charge of a storm that was just beginning. The heat in September did not break. It merely changed texture. In August, it had been a sharp, stinging fire that burned the skin. But as the weeks dragged toward autumn, the air turned heavy and suffocating, like a wool blanket soaked in hot water. The room above the apothecary became a kiln. Jesse Crow had been in Clara Hayes's back room for 12 days. Recovery was a slow, ugly business. It was not the romantic convalescence found in the penny dreadfuls, where a swooning hero lay with a fevered brow while a lady dabbed him with rosewater. It was the smell of stale blood and strong arnica. It was the humiliation of a bucket in the corner. It was the silence of two people trapped in a space meant for one, circling each other like stray dogs wary of a kick. They developed a rhythm born of necessity. Clara woke before dawn, dressed behind the paper screen she had erected in the corner, and left for her seamstress work before Jessie stirred. She returned at midday with food, usually cold biscuits and dried beef, hidden in her sewing basket, and fresh water. She changed his bandages with efficient, unsentimental hands, her face turned away from his bare chest as much as possible. Then she would leave again for the saloon, returning long after midnight, exhausted and smelling of tobacco smoke and cheap perfume. Jesse spent his days in the twilight of the drawn curtains. He was a pacer, a man built for open ranges and hard riding, and the confinement gnawed at him. He tested his shoulder daily, grimacing as he rotated the joint, counting the days until he could hold the weight of a Colt revolver without shaking. He watched Clara. He could not help it. He watched the way she moved, efficient and guarded. He noticed that she never fully relaxed, even when the door was locked. She sat in the wooden chair by the window to mend her own clothes, her spine as stiff as a rod. She was not kind, not in the way he understood kindness. She did not offer comforting words. She did not ask him about his life. She simply kept him alive. And in return, he offered her the only currency he had: restraint. He saw the way she flinched if he moved too quickly. He saw the gun she transferred from her corset to under her pillow every night. He understood that she viewed men as a species of threat, and he was determined to be the exception, if only to pay his debt. On the 14th day, the heat was particularly brutal. Clara sat by the window, the sash thrown open to catch a non-existent breeze. She was mending Jesse's duster coat. The bullet had torn a jagged hole through the heavy canvas and the lining, and she was patching it with a square of dark denim. Jesse sat on the edge of the cot, his shirt unbuttoned against the heat. He watched her needle flash in the dim light. "You have steady hands," he said. His voice was raspy from disuse. Clara did not look up. A seamstress with shaky hands is a beggar. Mr. Crow. Jesse leaned back against the wall. "You could have turned me in yesterday." Sheriff Rusk was standing right outside the apothecary. "I heard him laughing. I considered it," Clara said, biting a thread. "But the reward poster says dead or alive, and Rusk prefers dead. I do not want a corpse in my room. It is hard enough to get the smell of liniment out of the curtains." Jesse chuckled, a low, dry sound. "You are a hard woman. Clara Hayes." Clara paused. She lowered the coat to her lap and looked at him. Her eyes were dark, rimmed with the fatigue of double shifts and sleepless nights guarding a stranger. "I am a living woman." she said. "In this town, that takes a certain amount of hardness." She picked up the coat again, turning the sleeve inside out to check the lining. As she smoothed the fabric, her eyes caught the movement of his arm. He had reached for the water pitcher, the sleeve of his undershirt riding up. Clara stopped. The scars on his forearm were not from bullets or knives. They were thick, ropey welts that wrapped around the muscle in a spiral pattern, white against his tanned skin. They were burn marks, old but deep. She looked at them, then at his face. He saw her looking and slowly pulled the sleeve down, covering the marks. There was no shame in his expression, only a flat, guarded resignation. "Barbed wire?" she asked softly. Jesse poured a cup of water. His hand was steady. "Branding iron." He said. Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft. "They branded you? Like cattle?" "It was a long time ago," Jesse said, taking a drink. "I was 18. I worked a drive up from Texas. The trail boss claimed I stole a horse. I had not done it, but he needed someone to blame to balance his ledger. He said if I was going to act like a stray, I should be marked like one." He set the cup down. "That is when I learned that the law does not care about the truth. Clara, it cares about who holds the iron." Clara looked down at the coat in her lap. She ran her thumb over the rough patch she had just sewn. She had thought him a villain, a man who chose violence for the thrill of it. But looking at the scars hidden beneath his sleeve, she saw something else. She saw a map of cruelty. She saw a man who had been carved into a weapon by the hands of others. It changed the air in the room. The fear she had been nursing, the fear that he would turn on her, began to recede, replaced by a strange, heavy kinship. "I was married once," Clara said. The words came out before she could stop them. Jesse went still. He did not ask. He just waited. He was a respected man. She continued, her voice devoid of emotion. "A merchant in St. Louis. He had a fine house with velvet curtains. Everyone told me how lucky I was. He did not drink. He did not gamble." She pushed the needle through the canvas, dragging the thread tight, but he liked to break things. Small things. At first, china cups, vases. Then he started on me. He said it was my fault. He said I was too proud, that I needed to be humbled. She looked up at Jesse. "I put crushed glass in his supper," she said flatly. "I did not stay to see if he died. I took his money and I ran, and I have been running ever since." The silence that followed was thick, but it was not heavy. It was the silence of two people lowering their shields. Just an inch. Jesse looked at her, really looked at her. Seeing past the severe hair and the defensive posture, he saw the terror she kept locked in a cage of ribs and whalebone. "You missed," he said softly. Clara frowned. "What? You missed?" Jesse repeated. "If you had killed him, the Pinkertons would have found you by now. Men like that, they have long shadows." Clara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Perhaps, or perhaps the glass was too fine. She finished the stitch and bit the thread again. "Here," she said, tossing the coat onto the cot. "It is patched. Try not to get shot on the left side again." "I am running out of denim." 2 days later, the dynamic shifted from quiet confinement to active danger. Clara was walking down Main Street, a basket of supplies on her arm. The sun was directly overhead, bleaching the color out of the world. Dust devils swirled in the street, dancing between the legs of horses hitched at the rails. She was passing the sheriff's office when the door opened and Sheriff Rusk stepped out. He was a mountain of a man, his belly straining against his belt, his face perpetually flushed with heat and whiskey. "Miss Hayes," Rusk boomed. "Just the ray of sunshine I was hoping to see." Clara stopped. She kept her face neutral, her hands gripping the basket handle until her knuckles turned white. "Sheriff," she said, "I am in a hurry. Mrs. Gable is waiting for her lace." Rusk stepped in front of her, blocking her path. He smelled of chewing tobacco and sweat. "Mrs. Gable can wait," Rusk said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "We need to have a chat. Clara." "About your civic duties. I pay my taxes." "Sheriff, I ain't talking about money," Rusk sneered. He leaned closer, blocking the sun. I'm talking about cooperation. You see a lot of things in that saloon. You hear a lot of things. And yet, when I ask you who comes and goes, you turn into a mute. I mind my own business, Clara said. That is the only way a woman survives in this town. Rusk's eyes hardened. He reached out and brushed a piece of lint from her shoulder. Clara flinched, pulling back. Survival is a privilege, not a right. Rusk said, You exist here because Mr. Vale and I allow it. We tolerate your reputation, but tolerance has a limit. He leaned in until his breath washed over her face. We have a new shipment coming in on the train Thursday, he whispered. Girls, fresh from the east, looking for work. Domestic service, the advertisement said. He smiled, a greasy, knowing grin. Mr. Vale needs places to put them, work placements. Some might go to the brothels in the mining camps, some might stay here at the Golden Spur. I reckon you could help break them in. Show them the ropes. Tell them how much better it is to be agreeable. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She felt sick. She knew what he was talking about. She had seen new girls arrive before, bewildered, clutching carpet bags, asking for jobs that didn't exist. They usually disappeared within a week, shipped out to the rough camps in the hills where men paid in gold dust and violence. I am a seamstress, Clara said, her voice shaking slightly. Not a madam. Rusk stepped back, his smile vanishing. You are whatever I say you are, Clara. And if you are not useful, you are just clutter. And I have a habit of clearing out clutter. You remember that. He tipped his hat mockingly and strode away toward the saloon. Clara stood in the street, the sun beating down on her, feeling cold to her bones. It wasn't just corruption. It was a machine. Vale and Rusk were importing women like cattle, using the railroad to feed the appetites of the frontier. And they wanted her to be a cog in that machine. She hurried back to the apothecary, her heart pounding. When she burst into the room, Jesse was standing by the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. He spun around, his hand going to his hip before he realized it was her. What happened? He asked, seeing her pale face. Clara set the basket down, her hands trembling. She told him. She told him about the threat, about the shipment, about the cold, industrial way Rusk had spoken of human lives. Jesse listened, his jaw tightening. He walked back to the window and looked out. Come here, he said. Clara joined him. Keep back from the glass. Jesse pointed to the street below. 3 men were riding past the apothecary, heading toward the livery stable. They rode with a distinct swagger, their horses heavily laden with saddlebags. They wore long dusters and wide-brimmed hats, pulled low. Do you see the one on the roan mare? Jesse asked. The one with the red scarf? Yes, Clara said. That is Silas Vane, Jesse said, his voice hard. He rode with me for 2 years. He was the best tracker I ever saw. And the man next to him is Frenchie. He turned away from the window, pacing the small room. They are wearing new boots. Jesse said, and their horses are shod with fresh iron. They are not running. They are on a payroll. They work for Vale? Clara asked. Jesse nodded grimly. It makes sense. Vale wants to expand his land holdings. He needs muscle to scare off the homesteaders and the squatters. Who better to hire than a gang of outlaws who already know the territory? He gives them protection from the law, and they do his dirty work. He slammed his hand against the wall. They sold out. He muttered, We had a code. We didn't ride for the rich. We didn't hurt women. And now Silas is riding for a man who traffics girls? He looked at Clara, his gray eyes burning. I have to stop them. You can barely lift your arm. Clara snapped. If you go down there, Silas will put a bullet in you before you can say hello. I cannot just sit here, Jesse argued. You will sit here, Clara ordered. Or so help me. I will tell Rusk you are here myself. They stared at each other, the tension crackling in the room. It was not just fear or anger anymore. It was the friction of 2 people who cared too much about the outcome. Jesse sat down heavily on the cot. You are right, he admitted, but I am not going to let them turn this town into a slaughterhouse. Saturday night at the Golden Spur was a chaotic, roaring beast. The piano was loud, the laughter was raucous, and the air was so thick with smoke it stung the eyes. Clara was exhausted. She had been singing for an hour, and now she was weaving through the tables, serving drinks. The mood in the room was brittle. The miners were flush with pay, and the cowboys were drunk and looking for a fight. She approached a table near the back where 4 men were playing poker. One of them was a new deputy, a man named Hatcher. He was young, mean, and trying too hard to impress the older men. "Whiskey. Darling," Hatcher slurred, grabbing Clara's wrist as she set a glass down, and a smile. "You haven't smiled all night." "Let go of my arm," Clara said, her voice low. Hatcher laughed, tightening his grip. "You are a cold one, aren't you? That is what the boys say. Clara, the Ice Queen. Maybe you just need the right man to melt you." He yanked her toward him. Clara stumbled, the tray in her other hand tilting, sending 2 glasses of whiskey sliding off to crash onto the floor. The sound of breaking glass silenced the nearby tables. Clara tried to pull away, but Hatcher was strong. He pulled her into his lap, his hand groping at her waist, his wet mouth searching for her neck. "Stop it," Clara shouted, driving her elbow into his ribs. Hatcher grunted but didn't let go. He slapped her, a sharp, stinging blow across the cheek that made her ears ring. "You hold still when I'm being nice to you," Hatcher snarled. The room watched. No one moved. The piano player faltered. Rusk was not there, but his spirit was. This was the law in Red Hollow, taking what it wanted. Clara's hand went to her corset. She was going to shoot him. She didn't care about the consequences anymore. She could feel the cold pearl grip. Then, a shadow fell over the table. There was no shout, no dramatic entrance. One moment Hatcher was grappling with her, and the next, a hand reached down, a hand wrapped in a bandage, shaking slightly, but with a grip like iron. The hand grabbed Hatcher's thumb and bent it backward with a sickening snap. Hatcher screamed, releasing Clara. He scrambled up, reaching for his gun with his other hand. Jesse Crow stepped into the light. He was wearing his mended duster coat, his hat pulled low. He looked like death warmed over, pale, sweating, his left arm held stiffly against his side, but the gun in his right hand was steady, and it was pressed directly against Hatcher's forehead. "Sit down," Jesse said. His voice was not loud. It was a whisper that carried across the room. Hatcher froze. He looked into Jesse's eyes and saw the void. "Drop the gun," Jesse ordered. Hatcher opened his hand. His revolver clattered to the floor. Jesse looked around the room. He saw Silas Vane sitting at a table in the corner. Silas was staring at him, mouth slightly open, a card halfway to the table. Jesse didn't acknowledge him. He kept his eyes on the deputy. "You touch her again," Jesse said to Hatcher, "and I will not kill you. I will shoot your kneecaps off and leave you for the coyotes. Do you understand?" Hatcher nodded, tears of pain streaming down his face, clutching his broken thumb. Jesse holstered his gun. He looked at Clara. She was trembling, a red mark blooming on her cheek. "Come on," he said. He didn't touch her. He just turned and walked toward the back door. Clara followed him, her head high, ignoring the whispers that erupted like wildfire behind them. They walked out into the alley, into the cool night air. Clara's legs gave out, and she stumbled. Jesse caught her with his good arm, pulling her against him. They moved quickly through the shadows, avoiding the main street, back to the apothecary stairs, when they were finally inside the room. With the door locked and bolted, the adrenaline crashed. Clara leaned against the door, her chest heaving. She touched her cheek. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "They saw you. Silas saw you." Jesse was leaning against the vanity, gasping for breath. The exertion had cost him. Fresh blood was seeping through the bandage on his shoulder. "I could not watch it," he said. "I tried. I watched from the back, but—" He looked at her, his eyes dark with pain and something else. "You were going to shoot him," Jesse said. "Yes," Clara admitted. "Then I saved you from a hanging," he said. "That is a fair trade for the bandages." Clara looked at him. He was swaying on his feet. He had risked everything, his freedom, his life, his anonymity, for her. Not for a reward, not for a reputation. For her. The town would destroy her for this. She knew that. Tomorrow, the whispers would start. She tempted him. She brought the outlaw down on us. She is the reason for the violence. She would be a pariah. But looking at Jesse, standing there bleeding for her sake, she realized she didn't care about the town. She walked over to him. She reached out and took his hand, the rough, scarred hand that had broken a man's thumb to save her dignity. "Thank you," she said softly. Jesse looked down at her. The distance between them, which they had so carefully maintained for weeks, evaporated. The heat of the room seemed to spike. He reached up with his good hand and gently touched the red mark on her cheek. His thumb brushed her skin. Rough, but impossibly tender. "They do not deserve you." "Clara," he murmured. Clara made a sound that was half sob, half sigh. She stepped closer, tilting her head up. Jesse lowered his head. The kiss was not like the ones in the stories. It was desperate. It tasted of salt and fear and tobacco. It was a collision of two people who had been drowning and had suddenly found a piece of driftwood. Clara gripped the lapels of his duster, pulling him closer, needing to feel the reality of him. Jesse's arm went around her waist, holding her tight, anchoring her. It was a kiss that acknowledged the danger outside the door. It was a pact. We are here. We are alive. And we are not alone. When they pulled apart, they were both breathless. Jesse rested his forehead against hers. "We have to leave," he whispered. "Rusk will come for us now." Clara nodded, her eyes closed, listening to the beat of his heart against her chest. "I know," she said, "but not tonight. Tonight, the door is locked." Jesse pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "Tonight, the door is locked," he agreed. Outside. The wind picked up, howling through the eaves of Red Hollow, carrying the scent of a storm that would wash the streets clean or drown them entirely. The October wind in Red Hollow was a thief. It stole the last of the summer heat, stripping the moisture from the air until the skin felt like parchment, and it rattled the loose boards of the town as if testing the strength of every nail. The incident at the Golden Spur had settled over the town like a bruise, tender to the touch and ugly to look at. Edgar Vale did not shout. He was a man who understood that true power lay in silence and the slow accumulation of leverage. 2 days after Jesse Crow had broken Deputy Hatcher's thumb, Vale summoned Clara to his office above the bank. It was a room that smelled of expensive cigars and mahogany polish, a stark contrast to the dust and manure of the street below. Vale sat behind a desk that was wider than a wagon bed, his fingers steepled together. He was a handsome man in a hollow sort of way, with silver at his temples and eyes that looked like polished stones. "Please, sit down, Miss Hayes," Vale said, gesturing to a velvet chair. Clara remained standing. The corset felt tighter than usual today, the gun beneath it a cold, reassuring pressure against her ribs. "I have work to do, Mr. Val," Clara said. "The saloon opens in 2 hours." Vale smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "That is exactly what I wish to discuss. The saloon, it is becoming a dangerous place for a woman of your delicate position." "I can handle the saloon," Clara said. "Can you?" Vale asked softly. "Deputy Hatcher was a misunderstanding." "Certainly, but violence follows you. Clara, it trails behind you like a scent, and now there are rumors. Rumors that you have found a guardian angel, a man in a duster coat who moves faster than a shadow." Clara's heart hammered, but she kept her face still. Drunks see shadows everywhere. She said. Vale stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the town he owned in all but name. "I have a proposition for you. Clara, you are too valuable to be serving whiskey to cattle hands. I have a house on the north edge of town, a small place, private, respectable. I could set you up there. You would not have to sing. You would not have to sew until your fingers bleed. You would simply have to be available. For me. And for my select associates." The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He was offering to make her a kept woman, a high-class commodity to be traded among the powerful men of the territory. He was offering her a cage and calling it a sanctuary. Clara felt a wave of nausea, but she forced it down. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Vale turned back to her, his face a mask of polite regret. "Then I cannot guarantee your safety. Clara, the law is a fickle thing. Sheriff Rusk is very upset about his deputy's hand. If something were to happen to you, an accident, a fire, a sudden arrest, I would be powerless to stop it. Think of this as protection." "I do not need your protection," Clara said, her voice trembling with a rage she could barely contain. "I need my wages, and I need to be left alone." She turned and walked out, ignoring his call to wait. She descended the stairs with shaky legs, the sound of his low, confident chuckle following her like a draft. The threat was not empty. Clara knew that. But instead of retreating, she dug her heels in. If they wanted to treat people like cattle, she would start cutting fences. The train from the east arrived every Tuesday and Friday. It brought supplies, mail, and people running from failures back home. On Friday morning, Clara stood on the platform, watching the steam engine hiss and groan as it ground to a halt. She saw a girl step off. She could not have been more than 17, clutching a carpet bag that looked empty, her dress patched and dusty. The girl looked around with the wide, terrified eyes of a fawn on a highway. Sheriff Rusk was there, leaning against a post, watching the passengers. He straightened up when he saw the girl, tipping his hat, a predatory smile spreading across his face. Clara moved before she thought. She cut through the crowd, walking with a purpose that parted the sea of travelers. She reached the girl just as Rusk took his first step. "You must be Sarah," Clara said loud enough for Rusk to hear, grabbing the girl's arm. The girl blinked. "No, ma'am, I am." "My cousin Sarah," Clara interrupted, squeezing the girl's arm hard. "We have been expecting you. Come along, the wagon is waiting." She steered the bewildered girl away from the platform, shooting a glare at Rusk that dared him to intervene. Rusk stopped, his eyes narrowing, but he did not make a scene in front of the train conductor. Clara marched the girl all the way to the apothecary. When they were inside, she locked the door and leaned against it, exhaling sharply. The girl was trembling. "Ma'am, I do not know you. I have no money." Clara looked at her. The girl had the same color hair as her sister, the same desperation. "My name is Clara," she said gently, "and you do not need money, but you need to stay off the street until the next train leaves. There are men in this town who eat girls like you for breakfast." Upstairs, Jesse was cleaning his gun. He had recovered enough to move with his old grace, though his shoulders still ached when the weather turned. He listened as Clara explained the situation to the girl, whom she set up with a blanket in the corner of the workroom downstairs. When Clara came back upstairs, Jesse was waiting. "You are playing a dangerous game," he said. "Rusk will know what you did." "Let him know," Clara said, untying her bonnet. "I am done watching them harvest people." Jesse looked at her, admiration warring with concern in his gray eyes. He had spent the last week slipping out at night, ghosting through the town while Clara slept. He had broken into the land office. He had riffled through the trash behind the bank. "I found something," he said. He pulled a small, leather-bound ledger from his pocket. "Vale keeps duplicate records." Jesse said, "He is arrogant. He thinks no one would dare touch his things. This ledger details shipments, not of cattle, of labor." He opened the book to a marked page. "There is a place," Jesse said, 10 miles west, in the Canyonlands, the old Henderson Ranch. It has been abandoned for years, or so people think. The ledger lists it as a holding site. Supply wagons go out there twice a week." Clara looked at the book. The handwriting was precise, bureaucratic. It reduced human misery to columns and figures. "We have to see it," Clara said. Jesse nodded. "I intend to, but I cannot ride out alone. A lone rider in the Badlands attracts attention. A couple traveling together. That is just a domestic journey." Clara understood. "Widow Eubanks lives near the canyon mouth," she said. She orders heavy wool for quilts this time of year. I can say I am making a delivery. It is risky. Jessie said. Staying here is risky. Clara countered. If Vale is keeping women out there. We need to know. We need proof. They left at dawn the next day. They took a buckboard wagon, battered but sturdy, drawn by 2 mules that Clara rented from the livery stable. Jesse wore his hat pulled low and a scarf around his neck, hiding his face from the casual observer. To anyone passing by, they were just a seamstress and a hired hand delivering goods. The country west of Red Hollow was a graveyard of ambition. The land rose in jagged, red rock spines, tearing at the blue sky. The earth was scorched and cracked, dotted with sagebrush that clung to life with spiteful tenacity. It was beautiful in a violent, indifferent way. They rode in silence for the first few hours. The heat rose, baking the dust into a fine powder that coated their clothes. Jesse drove the mules, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He read the land like a book, noticing the disturbed gravel where a rider had passed, the circling of buzzards over a dead calf, the way the wind shifted in the box canyons. Around noon, they stopped to water the mules at a trickling spring. The silence of the desert was immense, a physical weight that pressed against the ears. Why do you do it? Jesse asked suddenly. He was leaning against the wagon wheel, rolling a cigarette. Do what? Clara asked, dampening a cloth to wipe her face. Help the strays. The girl at the station? Me? You could have walked away. Most people would have. Clara looked out at the shimmering horizon. A hawk was hunting in the distance, diving toward the scrub. I have a sister, Clara said. Her name is Alice. She had never said the name aloud in Red Hollow. It felt like breaking a seal. She was 16 when she vanished. Clara continued. We were in Kansas City. I was working in a laundry. She was supposed to meet me after her shift at the mill. She never came. She looked at Jesse. Her eyes were dry, but they held a grief so old it had become part of her structure, like a cornerstone. I went to the police. They laughed. They said she probably ran off with a boy. I went to the hospitals, the morgues. Nothing. Then, a month later, I heard a rumor about men who recruit girls for the Western Territories. Promises of marriage, promises of gold. She walked over to the mule, stroking its dusty neck. I have spent 4 years looking for her. Jessie. Every town I stop in, I look at the faces of the women in the saloons. I look at the girls working the street corners. I am not looking for a ghost. I am looking for a grave, or a prisoner. Jesse was silent. He let the smoke curl from his lips, his eyes fixed on her. The revelation shifted something in him. He had thought her motivated by simple morality, or perhaps a stubborn refusal to be bullied. But this was different. This was a wound that refused to close. It wasn't just about survival for her. It was a crusade. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. We will find out what is at that ranch. Clara, he said, I swear it. They reached the high ridge overlooking the old Henderson place by late afternoon. They left the wagon in a dry wash and climbed the last 100 yards on foot, belly crawling through the sagebrush to the edge of the cliff. Below them, nestled in a box canyon that hid it from the main road, was the ranch. It was a sprawling collection of buildings, fortified with new timber. A high fence, topped with barbed wire, encircled the main bunkhouse. Jesse pulled a small brass telescope from his coat pocket and peered down. 4 guards, he whispered. Rifles. They are walking a perimeter. He handed the glass to Clara. She put it to her eye. The lens magnified the scene, bringing the horror into sharp focus. In the yard, a group of women were washing clothes in large tin tubs. They wore gray shifts, shapeless and drab. They moved with the slow, robotic lethargy of the exhausted. One of them stumbled, dropping a basket of wet linens. A guard stepped forward and struck her across the shoulders with the butt of his rifle. Clara gasped, the sound sharp in the quiet air. She saw the woman fall. She saw the other women freeze, heads bowed, terrified to intervene. It is a prison, Clara whispered, her hand gripping the rock until her nails broke. It is not a ranch. It is a holding pen. Jesse took the glass back. He swept it across the compound. "I see wagons," he said, "covered, prepared for long travel. They are moving them soon, probably further west, or south to Mexico." He lowered the glass. His face was hard, the lines around his mouth etched deep. "We have seen enough," he said. "If we stay, the sun will catch the glass. We need to go." Clara wanted to scream. She wanted to take the gun from her corset and fire down into the yard, to kill the man who had struck the woman, but she knew the distance was too great, and the odds were suicide. She forced herself to crawl back, dragging her rage with her like a heavy chain. They camped that night in a shallow cave 5 miles from the ranch, hidden from the wind and the road. The temperature plummeted as soon as the sun vanished. The desert night was a cold, indifferent void, the stars hanging like chips of ice in the black sky. They built a small fire, feeding it with dried mesquite roots that burned hot and smokeless. They sat close to the flames, wrapped in blankets. They ate beans from a tin and drank coffee that was thick and bitter. The intimacy of the camp was different from the intimacy of the room in town. There were no walls here, no locks, just the two of them and the vast, breathing dark. Jesse sat with his back to the stone, watching Clara. The firelight softened the severe lines of her face, making her look younger, less armored. "You think she is down there, do you not?" Jesse asked quietly. "Alice?" Clara stared into the fire. "I do not know," she admitted. "Part of me hopes she is, because if she is there, I can save her. But part of me hopes she is dead, because if she has been in a place like that for 4 years... She trailed off. The thought was too dark to voice. Jesse reached out and took her hand. His skin was rough, warm against the chill of the night. "If she is there, we will find her," he said. "And if she is not, we will burn that place to the ground so no one else's sister ever ends up there." Clara looked at him. "You were going to leave," she said. "Once your shoulder healed, you were going to head for California." "I was," Jesse said. "And now?" "Now I'm angry," Jesse said. "And I am tired of running from things that matter." He squeezed her hand. "You asked me once if I had a heart. Clara, I told you to point a gun at it. I think I am starting to find it again, and it is angry." The air between them charged, heavy with the unspoken. Clara looked at his mouth, then up to his eyes. The desire that flared was not the frantic, adrenaline-fueled spark of their first kiss. This was slower, deeper. It was a recognition of shared scars. She moved closer, the blanket slipping from her shoulder. "Jesse," she whispered. He leaned in, his hand cupping her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Clara," he warned, low in his throat, "if we start this, I am not a man who walks away easily. Not anymore." "Good," Clara said, "because I am done with men who leave." She kissed him. It was a slow, deliberate claiming, in the cold silence of the Badlands, with the wind howling outside the cave. They found a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. It was a tenderness they both feared, a fragility they both needed. They held each other not as heroes, but as two broken things fitting together to make something whole. The return to Red Hollow 2 days later was a descent back into hell. They arrived on Sunday morning. The church bells were ringing, a hollow, clanging sound that echoed off the canyon walls. The town seemed quieter than usual, the streets empty as the citizens gathered in the white clapboard church at the end of Main Street. Clara and Jesse dropped the wagon at the livery. They walked toward the apothecary, keeping their distance from each other on the street, the mask of propriety back in place. As they passed the church, the doors stood open to catch the breeze. The voice of Reverend Pike boomed out, amplified by the acoustics of the hall. "And beware the Jezebel!" Pike shouted, his voice trembling with theatrical righteousness. "Beware the woman who brings the wolf into the fold. She walks among us with painted lips and a heart full of deceit. She opens the door to violence and calls it charity." Clara stopped. She froze on the boardwalk. "She invites the serpent into her bed." Pike continued. "She scorns the godly and consorts with the lawless. Is this what we want for our daughters? To see vice rewarded?" To see the fallen woman strut through our streets while honest men bleed. The congregation murmured. Clara could feel their eyes. Even through the walls, he was talking about her. Everyone knew it. Vale had whispered in the preacher's ear, and now God himself was being used to isolate her. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. It was one thing to be ignored. It was another to be declared a contagion. She turned and walked quickly toward the apothecary, her head down. Jesse followed, his face dark as a thunderhead. Inside the room, Clara began to pack. She pulled a canvas bag from under the bed and started throwing clothes into it. Her hands were shaking violently. "What are you doing?" Jesse asked, locking the door behind them. "I have to go," Clara said, her voice high and brittle. "Do you not hear them? They are working themselves into a frenzy. By tonight, they will be throwing rocks. By tomorrow, they will be burning us out." "Clara, stop!" Jesse said. "I cannot stay," Clara cried, spinning around. "Vale has won. He has turned the whole town into his weapon. If I stay, they will kill you to get to me, or they will kill me to punish you. I am the ruin. Jesse." "I am the lightning rod." She grabbed her shawl. "I will take the next train. I will go to San Francisco. You should go south." She tried to push past him. Jesse caught her by the shoulders. He did not shake her. He just held her, anchoring her to the spot. "No," he said. "Let me go." "Jesse, no!" he shouted, his voice cracking the panic in the room. He looked down at her, his eyes blazing. "I have spent 10 years running. Clara, I ran from the law. I ran from my past. I ran from the memory of the brand on my arm. And where did it get me? Bleeding out on a floor in a stranger's room." He tightened his grip on her shoulders. "I am done running. I am done letting men like Vale decide where I can live and who I can love." He let go of one shoulder and reached into his coat, pulling out the ledger he had stolen. "We have this," he said. "We have the proof. We know where the ranch is. We saw the women. We cannot fight a whole town," Clara whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. "We do not have to fight the town," Jesse said. "We just have to show them the truth. Pike is a windbag, but the people are scared. They are asleep. We have to wake them up." He took her face in his hands, wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You are not a ruin. Clara, you are the strongest thing I have ever known. You saved my life. Now let me help you save yours." Clara looked at him. She saw the resolve in his face, the steady, unyielding love that had grown in the shadow of violence. She realized that leaving would not save him. It would only destroy them both. She took a deep breath, her hands coming up to cover his. "Okay," she whispered. We stay. Jesse affirmed. "And we fight." Jesse looked at the ledger, then at the gun tucked into her corset. "We fight," he said, "but we do not fight fair. We fight to win." He walked to the window and looked out at the church, where the hymn was starting. "We need allies," he said. "We cannot do this alone." "I know a few," Clara said, her mind finally clearing. "There is a deputy, the one whose mother was Apache. He hates Rusk. And Widow Eubanks. Vale stole her water rights last year. And the ranch hand," Jesse added, "the one I saw at the saloon. He looked like he had seen a ghost when Hatcher touched you. I think he knows what Vale is doing, and it is eating him alive." They stood together in the dusty room, the plan forming between them. The fear was still there, cold and sharp, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. Clara reached under her corset and pulled out the small revolver. She checked the cylinder. 5 rounds. She snapped it shut. "Let us go find some witnesses," she said. Outside, the wind howled, kicking up dust against the window. But inside, the decision was made. The storm was no longer something to hide from. It was something they would become. The November sky over Red Hollow was the color of a bruised plum. The heat had finally broken, snapped in two by a cold front drifting down from the Rockies, bringing with it a biting wind that rattled the teeth and a smell of ozone that promised violence. Jesse Crow moved through the rail yard like a wraith. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, the hour when the iron beasts slept. and the only sound was the hissing of cooling steam and the crunch of cinders under boots. He kept to the shadows of the boxcars, his shoulder aching in the damp air, his hand resting near the gun on his hip. He found Dutch leaning against a water tower, smoking a pipe that smelled of cherry wood and cheap tobacco. Dutch was a rail clerk with ink-stained fingers and a spine curved from 20 years over a ledger. But he had ridden with Jesse's father before the war, and he remembered debts. "You are playing with fire, Jesse," Dutch said without turning around. He tapped his pipe against the wood. "Vale has men watching the manifest logs." "I do not need the logs," Jesse said, stepping out of the dark. "I need to know the schedule. When does the special cargo move?" Dutch sighed. A long, rattling sound. He turned, his face lined and weary in the moonlight. "There is a cattle train headed for the border on Friday," Dutch said quietly. "But there are 2 cars attached to the rear, windowless, reinforced. The bill of lading lists them as machinery parts, but machinery does not need water barrels and straw bedding." "Friday," Jesse repeated. "That is 3 days. They are clearing out the holding ranch," Dutch warned. "The governor is planning a tour of the territory next month. Vale wants the inventory gone before the politicians start shaking hands and kissing babies. If those girls get on that train, Jesse, they are gone. They will disappear into the mines in Mexico. You will never see them again." Jesse nodded. He slipped a gold coin into Dutch's pocket. It was the last of his money, but it bought silence. "Watch your back, son," Dutch whispered. "The rails sing, and they say Rusk is hiring gun hands from as far as Tucson." Jesse melted back into the shadows, his mind racing. 3 days. It was not enough time to gather a posse, but it was just enough time to start a war. While Jesse worked the shadows, Clara Hayes walked into the light. She had secured a commission from Mrs. Thorne, the wife of the town banker and a woman whose social ambition was only matched by her vanity. Mrs. Thorne needed a gown for the upcoming harvest festival, a velvet monstrosity in deep emerald that she hoped would outshine the mayor's wife. Clara knelt on the parlor floor of the Thorne residence, her mouth full of pins, adjusting the hem. The room was suffocatingly warm, heated by a coal stove and the heavy presence of Mrs. Thorne and her friends, Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Pike, the preacher's wife. They spoke as if Clara were furniture. "It is simply scandalous, Mrs." Pike said, sipping tea from a china cup. "Reverend Pike says the man is a killer, a cold-blooded animal. And to think he was hiding right under our noses. And whose fault is that?" "Mrs. Gable sniffed. "That woman at the apothecary. I always said she had the look of a stray cat. You feed a stray, you get fleas, or worse, Mrs." Thorne turned, causing Clara to prick her finger. Clara did not flinch. She sucked the drop of blood away and continued pinning. "Mr. Vale assures us the situation is under control. Mrs. Thorne said haughtily. "He told my husband that the sheriff has a plan to flush the rats out. He said by the time the governor arrives, Red Hollow will be a model of civilized society." "Civilized, Mrs." Pike scoffed. "I heard Vale is moving his interests south, cleaning the slate. Yes, Mrs." Thorne lowered her voice, leaning in. "Friday night. My husband signed the transfer papers for the rail cars yesterday. He said it is the last shipment of the season. Once it is gone, the town will be quiet again." Clara kept her head down, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Friday. The same day Jesse had suspected. She finished the hem with trembling hands. "It is done, Mrs. Thorne," Clara said, standing up and brushing the lint from her skirt. "Mrs." Thorne looked at the dress in the mirror, turning side to side. "It will do," she said dismissively. "You may go, and use the back door. We are expecting guests." Clara walked out into the cold afternoon air, her shawl pulled tight. She felt dirty, coated in the grime of their casual cruelty. But she had the truth, and the truth was a weapon she intended to use. The Harvest Festival fundraiser was held the following evening in the church basement. It was the social event of the season. a gathering of pie auctions and moral posturing intended to raise money for a new church bell. Clara had not been invited. She went anyway. She wore her plainest dress, a brown wool that had been turned twice, and her hair was pulled back severely. She entered the hall, and the noise died instantly. The fiddle player in the corner stopped his bow mid-stroke. 50 pairs of eyes turned to her, cold and judging. Sheriff Rusk stood near the punch bowl, his thumbs hooked in his belt. He watched her with a smirk that promised retribution. Clara walked to the table where the ladies were selling raffle tickets. She placed a silver dollar on the white tablecloth. "1 ticket, please," Clara said. Her voice was steady, though her knees felt like water. "Mrs." Gable stared at the coin as if it were cursed. "We do not want your money," she hissed. "It is American silver," Clara said. "It spends the same as anyone else's." "I said no." "Mrs." Gable said, her voice rising. "This is a respectable gathering. We do not break bread with harlots." A murmur went through the room. Someone laughed. A man in the back called out, "Ask her what she charges for a dance." Clara stood her ground. She looked at Mrs. Gable, then at Mrs. Thorne, and finally at Reverend Pike. "I am here to support the church," Clara said loudly. "Is charity only for the saints? Because I see a lot of sinners in this room." She looked directly at Sheriff Rusk. "I see men who take bribes. I see men who hurt women. And I see wives who look the other way because they like their silk dresses." Silence stretched tight as a drumhead. Rusk stepped forward, his face flushing red. "That is enough," Rusk growled. "Get out. Clara, before I drag you out." Clara looked him in the eye. "You can drag me out, Sheriff, but you cannot drag the truth out with me. Everyone knows what you are doing, and God is watching." She turned and walked out, leaving the silver dollar on the table. It shone under the lamplight. A small, defiant moon. As she stepped into the night, the sky broke open. The storm did not start with rain. It started with a roar. A flash flood in the high desert is a monster. It is a wall of water born miles away in the mountains, gathering speed and debris as it barrels down the dry washes. The sound hit the town before the water did. A low, grinding rumble, like the earth tearing apart. Then the rain came, a deluge that turned the dust to slick, impassable mud in seconds. Clara was halfway to the livery stable where she was to meet Jessie when the street became a river. The dry creek bed that ran through the center of town overflowed, sending brown water surging over the boardwalks. "Clara!" She heard Jessie's voice over the roar of the wind. He was on horseback, leading a second mount, struggling against the gale. He reached down and hauled her up behind him. "We have to go," he shouted. "The wash is flooding the road to the north. There are families out there in the shanties." They rode hard, the horses slipping in the mud. The world had dissolved into chaos. Lightning flashed, illuminating a landscape that looked like the end of days. Trees were uprooted, tumbling end over end in the churning water. 2 miles out of town, near the crossing of Willow Creek, they saw it. A wagon was overturned in the rising water. A man was waist-deep, trying to hold up the wagon bed, while a woman screamed, clutching a bundle of blankets. It was a migrant family, likely headed for the mines. They were trapped. Jessie did not hesitate. He spurred his horse into the water. "Hold on," he yelled to Clara. The water was freezing, a shock that took the breath away. The current slammed against the horse, nearly knocking them over. Jessie fought the reins, guiding the animal toward the wagon. "Take the child!" Jessie roared at the woman. Clara reached out, her arms straining. The woman passed the bundle, a terrified toddler, into Clara's arms. "Now you!" Jessie yelled. He grabbed the woman's arm and hauled her up behind Clara. The horse groaned under the weight. The man in the water lost his footing. He went under, the brown water swallowing him. "No!" the woman screamed. Jessie drew his rope. He built a loop with one hand, his movements practiced and calm despite the chaos. He threw it. The loop landed true, catching the man as he surfaced, gasping. Jessie dally-wrapped the rope around the saddle horn and turned the horse toward the bank. "Pull!" Jessie gritted his teeth. the veins in his neck standing out. The horse surged, its hooves clawing for purchase in the mud. Slowly, agonizingly, they dragged the man from the river. They collapsed on the high ground, the rain hammering down on them. The migrant family huddled together, shivering and weeping. Jesse and Clara sat in the mud, gasping for air, soaked to the bone. There was no sheriff here, no cattle baron, no judgment, just life and death, and the choice to act. Jesse looked at Clara. Her hair was plastered to her face, her dress ruined, holding the crying child. She looked fierce. She looked beautiful. "We need shelter," he said. "The old line shack. It is 1/2 mile up the ridge." The cabin was little more than a pile of logs with a tin roof, but it was dry. Jesse built a fire in the stone hearth, feeding it with dry wood stored in the corner. The migrant family took the back corner, falling asleep almost instantly from exhaustion. Jesse and Clara sat by the fire. They had hung their wet outer clothes on a line of rope. Clara was wrapped in a rough wool blanket. Jesse wore only his undershirt and trousers. The sound of the rain on the tin roof was deafening, a relentless drumbeat that isolated them from the rest of the world. The firelight danced on the walls, creating a small, warm universe in the midst of the storm. "You were reckless," Clara said softly, wringing out her hair. "You could have drowned." "I could have," Jesse admitted, pouring coffee from a battered pot into 2 tin cups. "But I didn't." He handed her a cup. Their fingers brushed. The contact sent a jolt through Clara that warmed her more than the fire. She looked at him. The water had washed away the grime of the trail. He looked younger, but his eyes were ancient. He was a man who had seen the worst of humanity and had chosen, today, to be the best of it. "Why?" she asked. "Why save them? You do not know them." "Because I could," Jesse said simply. "And because I wanted you to see that I am not just a gun hand. Clara, I wanted you to see the man I was before the branding iron." "I see him," Clara whispered. "I have seen him for a long time." She set the cup down. She stood up and let the blanket fall from her shoulders. She was wearing only her chemise and petticoat, the white cotton translucent in the firelight. Jesse stood slowly. He did not grab her. He did not move with the hungry desperation of the men in the saloon. He stood with his hands open at his sides, offering her the choice. Clara stepped closer. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath the scars. "I am not afraid," she said. "I am," Jesse confessed, his voice rough. "I am afraid I will break something this fragile. I am not fragile. Jesse, I am forged, just like you." She reached up and kissed him. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and smoke and survival. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against him. The heat of their bodies was sudden and overwhelming. They sank onto the pile of furs before the hearth. There was no hesitation now. The mistrust that had defined their early days was gone, washed away by the flood. This was not a taking. It was a giving. It was a reclaiming of the body and the soul from a world that tried to own both. Jesse's hands were gentle, reverent, tracing the lines of her body as if he were memorizing a map. Clara held him with a fierce possessiveness, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, deeper. In the darkness of the storm, with the world falling apart outside, they built something solid. They found a language that did not need words, a confession that did not need a priest. They belonged to no one but each other. The morning brought a gray, sullen light and a receding flood. The migrant family thanked them with tears and prayers. Heading south toward the border, Jesse and Clara rode north. They had to get back to Widow Eubanks's farm. Sarah, the young girl Clara had rescued from the train, was hiding there. With the storm clearing, Rusk would be on the move, and the widow's farm was too close to the canyon road. The air was cold and crisp. The desert smelled of sage and wet earth, a scent of renewal that felt like a lie. They were 3 miles from the farm when the shot rang out. It cracked through the silence like a whip. Jesse's horse reared, screaming. "Ambush!" Jesse shouted. He threw himself from the saddle, tackling Clara and dragging her behind a cluster of boulders just as a second bullet chipped the rock where her head had been. Gunfire erupted from the ridge above them. Bullets kicked up spurts of mud and stone. "Stay down," Jesse ordered. He drew his revolver and returned fire, aiming at the muzzle flashes in the rocks. Clara pulled her small pistol from her corset. Her hands were shaking, but she gripped the pearl handle tight. "Who is it?" she yelled over the noise. "Deputies," Jesse shouted back, "and hired guns. It is a trap." They were pinned down. The shooters had the high ground. Jesse fired 2 shots, forcing a man in a duster to duck back behind a mesquite bush. "We have to move," Jesse said. "They are flanking us." He turned to check the path behind them. A shot rang out. Closer this time. Jesse jerked violently. He grunted, a sharp exhalation of air, and collapsed against the rock. Blood blossomed on his thigh. Dark and fast. "Jesse!" Clara screamed. She scrambled to him. He was clutching his leg, his teeth gritted in pain. "I am fine," he gasped. "Keep firing." Clara raised her small gun and fired blindly at the ridge. It was not enough. They were outgunned. Then, through the ringing in her ears, she heard the sound of a wagon. On the road below, a buckboard came careening around the bend. It was driven by one of Rusk's men. In the back, struggling against ropes, was Sarah. They had not been waiting for Jesse and Clara. They had been raiding the widow's farm. They had Sarah! "Sarah!" Clara screamed, standing up, forgetting the cover. "Clara, get down!" Jesse roared. He lunged, grabbing her skirt and pulling her back just as a bullet tore through the fabric of her sleeve, grazing her arm. The wagon thundered past, mud spraying from the wheels. Sarah's terrified face flashed by, her mouth open in a silent scream. The gunmen on the ridge fired a final volley to keep them pinned, then mounted their horses and galloped after the wagon. Silence fell over the canyon. The only sound was the heavy breathing of 2 people and the drip of blood onto the wet stone. Clara sat in the mud, staring at the empty road. Her arm stung where the bullet had grazed her, but she didn't feel it. She felt a cold, hollow pit in her stomach. "I failed her," she whispered. She looked at her hands. They were covered in mud and Jesse's blood. "I told her she was safe. I told her I would protect her. And I led them right to her." She began to rock back and forth, the panic rising in her throat. "It is my fault. I was reckless. I thought love made us invincible. It just made us careless." Jesse dragged himself upright. He tied his scarf around his thigh, pulling the knot tight with a grimace. His face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, but his eyes were clear. "Stop it," he said. His voice was hard, cutting through her spiral. Clara looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "They took her. Jesse, they took her to the train. She is going to—" "Stop it!" Jesse shouted. He reached out and grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. "This is not your fault. Clara, do you hear me? This is not your sin. But I—" "No!" Jesse said fiercely. "This belongs to Rusk. This belongs to Vale. They are the predators. They are the ones who hunt children. You are the one who stood in the rain to save a stranger. You are the one who gave a girl a bed when the world gave her nothing." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Do not accept their guilt. Clara, do not let them make you carry their shame. That is how they win. They break you by making you think you deserve the breaking." Clara took a shuddering breath. She looked into his eyes and saw the fire burning there. Not the fire of destruction, but the fire of a forge. "She is gone," Clara whispered. "Not yet," Jesse said. He looked toward the south, where the train tracks cut through the valley. "They are taking her to the holding ranch," he said, "to group her with the others for the Friday train." He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the rock. His leg would slow him down, but it would not stop him. "We know where the ranch is," he said, "and we know when the train leaves." He held out his hand to her. "We are not going back to town. Clara, we are going to that ranch, and we are going to bring her back, or we are going to die trying." Clara looked at his hand. It was blood-stained and shaking, but it was open. She thought of the women in the church. She thought of Vale's smug smile. She thought of Sarah's face in the wagon, and she thought of the gun under her corset. She reached up and took his hand. She squeezed it hard. "Let us go," she said. She stood up, wiping the tears from her face. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. "Friday," she said. Friday. Jesse agreed. They limped toward their horses, two wounded figures moving against a backdrop of stone and sky, heading toward a reckoning that would burn the corruption out of Red Hollow, or consume them both in the flames. The Thursday night rendezvous took place in the hollow of a dead cottonwood tree 3 miles south of Red Hollow. The wind had died down, leaving a cold, brittle silence that amplified the snap of every twig. Jesse Crow sat on a flat rock, his injured leg stretched out before him. The bandage around his thigh was fresh, tied tight by Clara's hands, but the blood had already bloomed a dark circle through the linen. He was cleaning his Colt revolver, the metal parts laid out on a cloth. He did not look like a general assembling an army. He looked like a man preparing for his own funeral. Clara Hayes stood beside him, her arms crossed against the chill. She wore a man's riding coat over her dress, and the revolver under her corset felt heavy, a cold stone pressing against her solar plexus. They waited. The first to arrive was Caleb, the young ranch hand from the Golden Spur. He rode a skittish mare and looked ready to bolt himself. He dismounted, his hat in his hands, eyes darting to the shadows. "I brought the bolt cutters," Caleb whispered, as if the sagebrush might report him to Edgar Vale. "And the map. I drew it like you asked." Jesse nodded, reassembling his gun with a sharp click. "You are doing the right thing." "Son, I ain't doing it for you," Caleb muttered, looking at Clara. "I saw what they did to that girl. Sarah, I got a sister in Omaha. If someone did that to her—" He trailed off, spitting on the ground. The sound of hooves announced the next arrival. Widow Eubanks drove a light buckboard wagon, the wheels wrapped in rags to muffle the sound. She was a woman carved from granite, her face lined by 60 years of hard sun and harder luck. A Winchester rifle lay across her lap. "Mister, Vale took my water rights," the widow said, her voice like grinding stones. "He dried out my peach orchard. I reckon I am here to prune his branches." The last to arrive was the most dangerous. Deputy John Redhorse rode out of the darkness on a paint horse. He wore his badge, but he had turned it inside out so the silver star faced his chest. He was a man of few words, his mother Apache, his father a drifter, and his patience with Sheriff Rusk entirely exhausted. "Rusk is at the saloon," John said, dismounting. "He thinks this is a quiet night. He is drinking to the governor's visit." "Does he know about the train?" Jesse asked. "He knows the cargo is ready," John replied. "The guards at the Henderson Ranch are expecting a transport wagon at midnight. They think we are the transport." Jesse stood up, wincing as his weight settled on the bad leg. He looked at his ragtag army, a crippled outlaw, a seamstress, a guilty boy, an old woman, and a traitorous lawman. It was a joke. It was a tragedy waiting to be written, but it was all they had. "We go in quietly," Jesse said, his voice low. "We are not there to kill men if we can help it. We are there to get the women and the ledgers. Rusk can spin a gunfight as a gang war. He cannot spin the truth written in Vale's own hand." He looked at Clara. "You stay with the widow until the gate is open." "No," Clara said. Her voice was not loud, but it brooked no argument. "I am going to the bunkhouse. The women will not trust a man with a gun. They will trust me." Jesse looked at her. He saw the set of her jaw, the same steel that had been there the night she pointed the gun at his heart. He nodded once. "Keep your head down," he said. The approach to the Henderson Ranch was a journey through the throat of the Badlands. The moon was a sliver, offering just enough light to see the jagged outlines of the canyon walls. The air smelled of alkali and ancient dust. Coyotes yipped in the distance, a manic, laughing sound that made the skin crawl. They left the horses in the wagon half a mile out and moved on foot. The ranch sat in a depression, a dark scar on the pale earth. The main house was lit by yellow lantern light, but the long, low bunkhouse where the women were kept was dark. Jesse moved with a limp, but he moved silently. He signaled to John Redhorse. The deputy slipped into the shadows, heading for the guard tower near the gate. Clara followed Jessie toward the perimeter fence. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it might bruise her ribs. She gripped the wire cutters Caleb had given her. Wait for the signal. Jessie breathed in her ear. They watched. Up in the tower, a match flared as a guard lit a cigarette. A moment later, a shadow rose behind him. There was a dull thud, and the cigarette arc fell to the ground. The guard slumped forward. John raised his hand. Jessie cut the wire. Clara slipped through the gap, the barbs catching on her coat. She moved toward the bunkhouse, keeping low. Caleb went with her, his eyes wide with terror, carrying a heavy iron bar. Jessie turned toward the main house. That was where the ledgers would be. That was where the fight would be. Clara reached the door of the bunkhouse. It was padlocked from the outside. "Break it," she whispered to Caleb. Caleb jammed the iron bar into the hasp and heaved. The wood groaned. Inside, there was a sudden rustling, the sound of terrified whispers. With a loud crack, the hasp gave way. Clara pulled the door open and stepped into the gloom. The smell hit her first. Unwashed bodies, sickness, and fear. It was the smell of a cage. "Who is there?" A voice trembled. "It is Clara," she whispered. "I have come for Sarah. I have come for all of you." A lantern flared to life at the far end of the long room, but it was not one of the women holding it. Sitting on a crate, picking his teeth with a knife, was a man. He was large, his belly spilling over his belt, his face marked by a long, pale scar running through his beard. "Well now," the man said, standing up slowly, "if it isn't the little seamstress." Clara froze. The blood turned to ice in her veins. She knew him. His name was Grady. 5 years ago, on the trail from St. Louis, he had been the wagon master. He was the man who had told her that a woman alone had to pay a toll to be safe. He was the reason she carried a gun. He was the nightmare she woke up from screaming. "Mr. Grady," Clara said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "I heard you were in town," Grady grinned, stepping closer. The lantern light swung, casting long, dancing shadows. "You were a fighter back then. Clara, I like a fighter. Makes the breaking more fun." He looked at Caleb, who was standing in the doorway, paralyzed. "Run along, boy," Grady barked, "before I gut you." Caleb dropped the iron bar and bolted. The sound of his running footsteps faded into the night. Clara was alone. Behind her, in the shadows, 20 women huddled against the walls, watching. "You should not have come here." "Clara," Grady said, pulling a heavy revolver from his belt. "Now I get to finish what we started on the trail." He raised the gun. Clara did not flinch. She did not scream. A strange calm settled over her. This was not a new horror. This was an old ghost, and ghosts could be exorcised. She reached into her dress. She did not fumble. Her hand found the pearl grip of the .32. "You think you can draw on me?" Grady laughed. "I will blow a hole in you before you clear leather." "I do not need to clear leather," Clara said softly. She fired through her coat. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The muzzle flash lit up the room for a split second. Grady bellowed, dropping his gun. He clutched his right thigh. Staggering back, Clara had aimed low. She stepped forward, tearing the coat open to free her arm, leveling the gun at his face. "Sit down," she ordered. Grady fell back onto the crate, gasping, blood seeping through his fingers. He looked at her with shock, the arrogance wiped clean. "You shot me," he wheezed. "You crazy bitch, you shot me." Clara walked until the barrel of her gun was inches from his nose. Her hand was rock steady. "Open the back door," she said. I do not have the key." Grady stammered. Clara cocked the hammer. "Open it." Grady fumbled at his belt, his hands slick with blood. He produced a ring of keys and threw them to her. Clara caught them. She did not look away from him. "Get up," she said to the women. "Move, now." The women hesitated, then surged forward. They grabbed the keys. Sarah was there, her face bruised, her dress torn. She looked at Clara, then at the gun. "Clara?" Sarah whispered. "Go," Clara said. "The widow Eubanks is waiting by the north fence. Go!" The women flooded out the back door, into the night. Clara stood alone with Grady. "You are dead." "Clara!" Grady sneered, pain making him bold. "Vale will skin you alive." Clara looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes. She realized suddenly that he was small. He was just a man, a cruel, pathetic man who borrowed power from others. "I'm not dead, Mr. Grady," Clara said. "And I'm not yours. I never was." She pistol-whipped him. A short, sharp blow to the temple. He slumped to the floor, unconscious. Clara holstered her gun. She took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of dust and freedom. She turned and ran into the night. In the main house, the silence had been shattered. Jessie kicked open the door to the office. Silas Vane was there, stuffing papers into a saddlebag. Silas spun around, his hand going for his gun. "Don't," Jessie said, leveling his Colt. Silas froze. He looked at Jessie, then at the gun. He smiled, a sad, crooked expression. "I figured it was you, Jessie. When I heard about the ambush, you always were hard to kill. Put the bag down. Silas." Silas hesitated. "It is a lot of money. Jessie, Vale pays well, better than the cattle drives. It is blood money. Silas, and you know it. Selling girls? Is that what we became?" Silas's face hardened. "The world changed. Jessie, the open range is gone. It is all fences and railroads now. A man has to pick a side. You picked the wrong side." Silas moved. He was fast, faster than Jessie remembered. He dove behind the heavy oak desk, firing as he went. Jessie threw himself to the side, his bad leg giving out. He hit the floor hard, biting back a scream. A bullet tore into the wall inches from his head. He rolled, firing 2 shots into the desk. Wood splinters flew. "Give it up! Silas!" Jessie yelled. There was silence. Then, Silas's voice, closer this time. "You are slowing down. Old man, that leg is stiff." Jessie listened. He heard the creak of a floorboard to his left. Silas was flanking him. Jessie closed his eyes for a second, centering himself. He remembered the rhythm of the breathing, the way the air moved before a storm. He spun on his back, firing blindly toward the shadow by the bookcase. Silas fired at the same instant. Jessie felt the wind of the bullet pass his ear. Silas grunted. There was the heavy sound of a body hitting the floor. Jessie lay there, his chest heaving, listening. "Jessie?" Silas whispered. It was a wet, gurgling sound. Jessie dragged himself up. He crawled over to where his friend lay. Silas was hit in the chest. The light was fading from his eyes. You always were lucky," Silas rasped. "It wasn't luck," Jessie said softly. He reached out and took the saddlebag from Silas's grip. Tell Mary I tried to send money. Silas said." His eyes fixed on the ceiling, and then he was gone. Jessie sat there for a moment, the weight of the years pressing down on him. He had killed a man he once shared a blanket with. He had killed a part of his own history. He stood up, grabbing the bag of ledgers. He limped out the door, leaving the past dead on the floor. The ride back to Red Hollow was a funeral procession in reverse. The wagon was full of women, huddled together under blankets, weeping with relief. Deputy Redhorse and Jessie rode point, while Clara sat in the back of the wagon, holding Sarah's hand. The sun began to rise as they crested the final ridge. The light hit the town of Red Hollow, painting the storefronts in deceptive gold. Sheriff Rusk was waiting. He stood in the middle of Main Street with 5 deputies. They had blocked the road with barrels. A crowd had gathered on the boardwalks. Shopkeepers, early risers, the curious and the fearful. Rusk saw the wagon and raised his hand. "Halt!" he boomed. Jessie did not halt. He kept his horse walking, his hand resting on his thigh near his gun. The wagon creaked along behind him. "Get down from that horse! Crow!" Rusk shouted. "You are under arrest for kidnapping and murder. We found the bodies at the ranch." The crowd murmured. "Kidnapping? Murder?" Jessie stopped his horse 10 yards from the sheriff. He looked tired, bloody, and utterly unafraid. There was no kidnapping. "Sheriff," Jesse said, his voice carrying in the morning air, "we are returning stolen property, but not the kind you think." He nodded to the wagon. Clara stood up. She climbed down from the wagon bed. Her dress was torn, her coat stained with Grady's blood. Her hair had come loose from its pins. She looked like a woman who had walked through hell and come out the other side burning. She walked past Jesse, past the deputies, until she stood in the center of the street, facing the town. Mrs. Gable was there. Mrs. Thorne, the Reverend Pike. They watched her with wide, shocked eyes. "These are the women!" Clara shouted, pointing to the wagon. Sarah stood up, then another woman, and another. They were bruised, thin, terrified. "Look at them!" Clara's voice cracked like a whip. "Look at what your sheriff has been hiding. Look at what Mr. Vale has been selling." She reached into the saddlebag Jesse held out to her and pulled out the ledger. She held it high. "It is all here," Clara yelled. "The names, the dates, the payments. Sheriff Rusk took $500 last month to look the other way while these girls were beaten and chained. Lies!" Rusk screamed, his face turning purple. "She is a whore and a liar. Shoot her!" He drew his gun. Nobody moved. The deputies looked at the wagon. They looked at the women. They looked at their own wives and daughters on the boardwalk. "Shoot her!" Rusk roared, leveling his pistol at Clara. Jesse spurred his horse forward, placing himself between Clara and the gun. He did not draw his weapon. He just sat there, a shield of flesh and bone. "Go ahead." "Rusk," Jesse said calmly. "Shoot an unarmed woman. Shoot a man with his hands on the reins. Show them what you really are." Rusk's hand wavered. Then, from the boardwalk, a voice spoke up. "Put the gun down." "Sheriff, it was Mr. Thorne, the banker." He stepped into the street, his face pale. "Put it down," he repeated. "We want to hear what the ledger says." "Mrs." Gable called out, clutching her shawl. Rusk looked around. The town was turning. The fear that had held them silent was breaking under the weight of the reality before them. They could ignore rumors. They could not ignore 20 weeping women and a ledger written in ink and blood. Rusk lowered his gun slowly. His eyes darted like a trapped rat. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Vale will burn this town. Vale is finished." Jesse said. Deputy Redhorse stepped forward, pulling the handcuffs from his belt. "Sheriff Rusk," he said, his voice flat. "You are under arrest." As the cuffs clicked shut, the tension broke. People flooded into the street. Women ran to the wagon with blankets and water. Men shouted questions. Clara stood in the center of the chaos, clutching the ledger to her chest. She was shaking now, the adrenaline fading. She felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned. Jesse was standing there. He had dismounted, favoring his good leg. He looked at her with a pride that made her knees weak. He did not try to take the ledger. He did not try to take the credit. He simply stood beside her, a solid, unmoving presence. "You did it," he said softly. Clara looked at him. She looked at the town that had scorned her, now looking to her for answers. She looked at the gun still tucked in her corset. "We did it," she corrected. She took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. The sun was fully up now, harsh and bright, revealing every scar on the buildings and every line on their faces. It was not a pretty morning. It was not a romantic morning. It was an honest one. Clara took a breath, squeezed Jesse's hand, and turned to face the crowd. "My name is Clara Hayes," she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong, "and I have a story to tell you." The trial was moved to Blackwood County, 2 days' ride east of Red Hollow, a decision made by a traveling judge who smelled the rot in the local jurisdiction and wanted to air it out on neutral ground. But corruption, Clara Hayes learned, was not a weed that grew in only one garden. It was a vine that stretched across the territory, tangling around bank ledgers and political favors until it choked the life out of anything trying to stand straight. The courthouse in Blackwood was a brick imposition with high windows that let in the gray December light, but none of the warmth. The air inside smelled of stale tobacco, wet wool, and the nervous sweat of men facing judgment. The gallery was packed. Word of the scandal had traveled faster than the telegraph, and the citizens of Blackwood had turned out to see the cattle baron and the fallen woman, a spectacle that promised more drama than the traveling circus. Clara sat in the front row, her back as rigid as a church pew. She wore a dark blue dress, high-collared and severe, her hands folded in her lap. To her left sat the women, Sarah, Maria, and the others rescued from the Henderson Ranch. They were washed and dressed in clothes provided by the church charity, but their eyes were darting, terrified rabbits in a room full of wolves. Edgar Vale sat at the defense table. He did not look like a prisoner. He was shaved, his suit was pressed, and he whispered confidently to a lawyer named Finch, a man with a smile like a razor blade. Sheriff Rusk sat beside him, sullen and sweating, his badge already stripped but his malice intact. Jesse Crow was not with them. He was in the holding cell in the basement, chained like a bear. They would not let him sit in the open court until it was his turn to speak, fearing his reputation more than his current, wounded reality. The first day of testimony was a slaughter. Lawyer Finch was a master of the polite assault. He did not shout. He simply asked questions that peeled the skin off the witnesses. When Sarah took the stand, trembling so hard the railing shook, Finch paced before her like a pacing cat. "You say you were held against your will, Miss Sarah," Finch purred. "Yet, is it not true that you came to the territory looking for work? Is it not true that you accepted room and board from Mr. Vale's associates?" I thought it was a job," Sarah stammered. "A job," Finch repeated, looking at the jury, 12 men with stone faces. "And when the work was harder than you expected, or perhaps less dignified than you hoped, you decided to cry wolf? Is it not possible that you simply regretted your choices and sought to blame a wealthy man for your own moral failings?" Sarah looked down, tears dripping onto her hands. The shame in the room was a physical weight, pressing her into silence. Clara felt the panic rising in the group behind her. If Sarah broke, they would all break. Clara stood up. She did not shout. She simply stood, a dark pillar in the sea of gray coats. "Look at me, Sarah," Clara said. Her voice was calm, cutting through the lawyer's drone. The judge banged his gavel. "You are out of order. Madam, sit down." Clara ignored him. She locked eyes with the terrified girl. "Look at me, Sarah. You are not the one on trial. Tell them about the lock on the door. Tell them about the guard who hit you. Tell them the truth, and do not let this man make you small." Sarah looked at Clara. She saw the seamstress who had faced down a gunman. She saw the woman who had not looked away. Sarah took a breath. She wiped her face. "It was not a job," Sarah said, her voice finding a sudden, sharp edge. "It was a prison. They beat us. They starved us. And Mr. Vale came to watch." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Finch tried to object, but the spell of intimidation was broken. Clara sat down, her heart hammering, but her face composed. The second day brought the technical dismantling of the empire, delivered by Deputy John Redhorse. He took the stand in his uniform, the badge pinned back on his chest. Finch tried to dismiss him as a disgruntled employee, a man with a grudge against his superior. But John had brought paper. He laid the ledgers on the judge's bench. "These are the warrants," John said, his voice flat and factual. "Signed by Sheriff Rusk. They authorize the arrest of women for vagrancy. But the dates on the warrants are often days after the women were already in custody at the ranch. They were kidnapping them first and writing the law to match it later." He opened another book. "And these are the death certificates. 7 of them in the last 2 years, all listed as natural causes or exposure. All women of color, indigenous, Mexican, mixed blood." He looked at the jury. They targeted these women because they thought no one would ask where they went. They thought their lives were worth less than the cattle mister. Vale ships east. This was not just a business. It was a hunting ground. The silence in the room was different now. It was not the silence of judgment, but the silence of horror. The systemic nature of the crime, the way the law itself had been weaponized against the vulnerable, was laid bare in black ink. On the third day, they brought Jesse Crow up from the basement. The sound of his chains clanking against the floorboards heralded his arrival. He walked with a heavy limp, his legs stiff, his face pale from the weeks of confinement and the healing wound. But his head was high. He wore a clean shirt Clara had sent him, and he looked at the jury not with defiance, but with a weary acceptance. "State your name," the prosecutor said. "Jesse Crow. You are a wanted man. Mr. Crow. You are known as a bank robber and a thief." "I am," Jesse said. "So why should this court believe the word of an outlaw against a pillar of the community like Edgar Vale?" Jesse leaned forward on the railing. He looked at Vale, who refused to meet his eyes. "I have robbed banks," Jesse said, his voice raspy but clear. "I have taken gold that was insured by companies in New York. I have shot men who were trying to shoot me. I have done many things that will send me to prison, and I accept that." He paused, letting the words settle. "But I never sold a human being. I never beat a woman to make her compliant. I never used a badge to hide a crime." He looked at the jury. "You call me a criminal. Fine, I am a criminal, but that man," Jesse pointed a shackled hand at Vale, "is a monster. I broke the law to survive. He broke the law because he thought he was above it. If you are going to hang me, hang me. But do not let him walk out of here and call it justice. The trial was not the end of the violence." Vale knew the tide had turned. He knew the ledgers were damning. He had one card left to play, a card bought with the last of his hidden gold reserves. On the fourth day, the judge ordered the witnesses to be transported to a secure hotel in the next town over. Fearing for their safety in the chaotic atmosphere of Blackwood, Jesse was to be transported back to the jail in a separate wagon. The convoy moved out at dusk. Clara rode in the first wagon with Sarah and John Redhorse. Jesse was in the second wagon, guarded by 2 marshals. The road wound through a narrow pass known as Devil's Gulch, a place where the rock walls squeezed the road tight against a drop-off. They hit the ambush at the narrowest point. A tree had been felled across the road. As the lead wagon halted, gunfire erupted from the cliffs above. It was not a warning. It was an execution attempt. "Get down!" John Redhorse shouted, shoving Clara and Sarah to the floorboards as bullets splintered the wood of the wagon box. John grabbed his rifle and returned fire, but the shooters were well hidden. Behind them, the second wagon was under heavy fire. The horses panicked, rearing and twisting in their traces. "Jesse!" Clara screamed, scrambling to look back. The marshals in the second wagon were pinned down. One was hit. Jesse, shackled hand and foot, was trapped in the open cage at the back. But Jesse Crow did not stay trapped. With a roar of effort, he kicked the door of the cage. The lock, already damaged by a stray bullet, gave way. He tumbled out onto the road, dragging his chains. He didn't run for cover. He scrambled toward the fallen marshal, grabbing the man's rifle and the keys to his cuffs. He fumbled with the keys as bullets kicked up dust around him. With a metallic click, his hands were free, though the leg irons remained. He rolled behind the wheel of the wagon and brought the rifle up. He fired, working the lever with a speed that blurred. He hit a man on the ridge, then another. He was drawing their fire. He was making himself the target to spare the lead wagon. "Go!" Jesse shouted to John. "Get them out of here. We cannot leave you," Clara cried, grabbing the reins of the lead wagon as the driver slumped over. Wounded? "Go! Clara!" Jesse roared, standing up to fire again. A shot rang out, a heavy, booming sound from a buffalo rifle on the high ridge. Jesse spun around. He was hit in the side, just above the hip. The impact knocked him backward against the wagon wheel. "No!" Clara screamed. She grabbed the whip and lashed the horses. Not to flee, but to turn. She drove the wagon straight at the roadblock, the terrified team scrabbling over the fallen tree trunk in a spray of splinters and hooves. John Redhorse provided covering fire, his aim true. He took out the man with the buffalo rifle. The ambushers, seeing their advantage lost and their numbers dropping, broke and ran. They were hired guns, not fanatics. They weren't paid to die. Clara halted the wagon and leaped down, running back to where Jesse lay in the dirt. He was conscious, but his breathing was shallow. Blood soaked the side of his shirt, dark and glossy in the twilight. "You are a stubborn woman," Jessie wheezed, looking up at her with a pained smile. "I told you to go, and I told you I was done running," Clara sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound to staunch the flow. John Redhorse ran up, checking the perimeter. "They are gone," John said, "but we need a doctor. Now." The ambush was the final nail in Edgar Vale's coffin. The captured gunmen, those who hadn't fled, gave him up instantly to save their own necks. There was no spinning an attack on a federal transport. The verdict came down 3 days later. Edgar Vale was found guilty on 12 counts of human trafficking, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in the territorial prison, his assets seized, his empire dismantled. Sheriff Rusk was stripped of his office and sentenced to 20 years for corruption and accessory to murder. The courtroom cheered when the gavel fell. It was a raw, angry sound, the sound of a town exhaling after holding its breath for a decade. But for Clara, the victory was quiet. She sat in the hospital room where Jesse lay. He had survived the surgery to remove the bullet, but the infection had nearly taken him. He was thin, his face gaunt, but the fever had finally broken. His sentencing had been held in the hospital room, a rare concession from the judge who had heard of his actions at the ambush, given his cooperation, the lives he saved, and the testimony of Deputy Redhorse. The judge had been lenient. 5 years. The judge had said, with credit for time served and good behavior, he could be out in 3 years. It felt like a lifetime. It felt like a blink of an eye. Winter turned to spring, and spring to summer. Red Hollow changed. It did not become a paradise overnight. Prejudice was a stubborn root. And there were still those who crossed the street when Clara walked by. Those who whispered that she was a trouble magnet. But they whispered quietly. Because Clara Hayes was no longer just the seamstress. She was the woman who had brought down the Baron. She used the reward money, given to her for the capture of the outlaws, to buy the building next to the apothecary. She painted the sign herself, Hayes Seamstress Lodging. It was not just a business, it was a sanctuary. She hired Sarah and Maria. They sewed dresses, yes, but they also provided rooms for women traveling through, women looking for work, women running from bad husbands. It was a place where the door had a strong lock and the tea was always hot. Deputy John Redhorse was made interim sheriff. He cleaned house, hiring men who knew the difference between the law and a paycheck. The town began to breathe. The stolen water rights were returned, and the Widow Eubank's orchard bloomed green again. The day Jesse was to be transferred to the territorial prison arrived with a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Clara drove the wagon to the jail. John led Jesse out. He was dressed in travel clothes, his hands cuffed in front of him, but his legs free. He walked with a cane now. The hip wound had left him with a permanent hitch in his stride, a physical memory of the canyon road. John unlocked the cuffs for a moment, allowing them a private goodbye by the wagon wheel. "You look good," Jesse said, his eyes drinking her in. She wore a dress of pale yellow, the color of desert primrose. She looked like morning. "You look thin," Clara said, adjusting his collar. "They better feed you in Yuma. I will survive," Jesse said. "I am good at surviving." He reached out and touched her cheek. 3 years. Clara, it is a long time. You do not have to wait. You have a business now, a life. You are respectable. Clara laughed, a low, throaty sound. "I will never be respectable. Jesse, I am the woman who hid an outlaw in her wardrobe. I am the woman who shot a wagon master." She reached into her pocket. She pulled out the pearl-handled revolver. The sun caught the metal, making it gleam. "I am keeping it," she said quietly. Jesse looked at the gun. He didn't frown. He didn't tell her to throw it away. He nodded slowly. "Good," he said. Clara looked down at the weapon, then up at him. "I keep it because I know that hope is a fine thing. Jesse, but hope does not stop a door from being kicked in. Hope does not stop a man like Vale." She tucked the gun back into her pocket, hidden in the folds of her skirt. "I will be here," she said. "I will be building. I will be fighting. And when you walk out of those gates, I will be waiting." Jesse smiled. It was the same smile he had given her that first night, tired, dangerous, but filled with a profound, aching tenderness. "Point it at me if you want my heart," he whispered, echoing the words that had started it all. Clara stepped in close, ignoring the eyes of the deputies, ignoring the town, ignoring the world. She kissed him. It was a promise sealed in breath and blood. "You already gave it to me," she said against his lips. "Now go and get it back so you can bring it home." Jesse climbed into the wagon. He didn't look back as the wheels began to turn. He didn't have to. He knew she was standing there, a figure of iron and lace against the dusty street. Clara watched the wagon disappear over the ridge. The wind kicked up, smelling of sage and future storms. She put her hand on her pocket, feeling the cold weight of the gun and the warm beat of her own heart. She turned and walked back toward her shop, where the door was open and the work was waiting. The Wild West was still wild, but she was no longer just surviving it. She was living it. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Clara and Jesse. It has been a long ride through the dust and danger of Red Hollow, and I truly appreciate you sticking with them until the very end. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment sharing your location and your thoughts on the ending. Did Clara and Jesse find the justice they deserved? If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to From Wild West for more stories of grit, gunpowder, and love on the frontier. I look forward to reading your comments in English and sharing the next adventure with you.